They actually did it, folks. The city of Chicago has bucked all logic, all reason, all fiscal discipline, all warnings about the impending financial cliff in order to borrow $830 million now, which of course will cost them over $2 billion in total throughout the term of the loan, which they won't start paying back on the principal until the year 2045. They've kicked the can down the road once again, and as we talked about, even though this bill is sold as a way to pay for the infrastructure, it turns out, due to nasty provisions that were tucked into said bill, this in reality is likely Brandon Johnson's way of bailing out the teachers union, of giving them that pay increase that he wanted, that he's tried to bankrupt the city in order to do time and time again, because if you look at the bill itself, they actually have carve-outs of where they can distribute this money away from the critical infrastructure investments that supposedly this is all about. And the reason why they're ending up doing it like this is because this is how they've always done business. It's one of the worst fiscally run cities in the entire country, and Brandon Johnson knows that he will be long gone by the time it comes due, and they're gonna have to suffer the consequences of that. In addition to that, Brandon Johnson, of course, is on leave from the Chicago Teachers Union, so that means that Brandon Johnson will benefit from this when he resumes his role after he's done as mayor. And guess what? Considering he has about a 6% approval rating, which is the lowest in the entire country, I believe, that will be sooner rather than later. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to break this down. I'm also going to educate you about another terrible deal that the city of Chicago is suffering from. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
On the surface, it sounds great for Chicago. New money to repair crumbling streets, rusted light poles, bad bridges. But critics say while those fixes need to be made, the way the city plans to pay for it all is not. City Council narrowly approving an $830 million bond measure today.
So let's make something 100% clear for everybody out there in the audience. Cities like the city of Chicago do not increase infrastructure spending by $1 billion over the course of a year. What actually ends up happening in a lot of these cases is that they borrow the money or get the money through grants from the federal government, and then they produce corresponding cuts to the non-earmarked money in the general fund in order to pay for the priorities that they actually want to pay for. That is normal, standard operating procedure. However, in this particular case, the terms of this loan, how the money could be spent, are written so broadly and so poorly that it essentially licenses Brandon Johnson to bail out illegal aliens and, of course, to bail out the teachers union. And again, I will highlight the provision in question that this local news report is not highlighting, that they're not paying attention to, because even though they got the basic terms of the loan, the fact that the loan doesn't even have to go to infrastructure seems to be completely absent from their reporting. Now, as you can see right here, we have a page from the bill that was shared to us and highlighted for us by a man called Austin Berg. I will link his tweet in the description if you want to go follow him. And it starts off pretty reasonable. It says, whereas the city has determined that it is in the best interest of the inhabitants of the city and necessary for the welfare of the government and affairs to the city to implement a plan to provide for the financing of the public right-of-way improvements and all these other different things that sound like they're very related to infrastructure. However, once you get to point 4, what you find out is that they also authorize loans or grants to assist individuals, not-for-profit organizations, or educational or cultural institutions, or for-profit organizations, or to assist municipal corporations, units of local government, school districts, the state, or the United States of America. Now, what this means is that points 1, 2, and 3, which are very specific about improving lanes, improving traffic lights, and so on, are completely and totally irrelevant. In reality, this is a license for them to blow this money writ large, and again, you will notice that educational institutions and school districts and not-for-profits are all mentioned along with other municipal corporations. Essentially, they have 3 lanes of cover to bail out teachers unions, and in addition to that, this money can go to the nonprofits that happen to be providing services for illegal aliens. So essentially, the city of Chicago is borrowing nearly $1 billion, which will cost them over $2 billion throughout the term of the loan, in order to bail out Brandon Johnson's favored industries, Brandon Johnson's favored lobbying groups, and of course to support his ideological agenda of putting the illegal migrants first.
Both sides using the kids will pay for it argument at council.
We're not mortgaging the future of our children. In fact, we are building the roads that they're going to use.
The $830 million bond would go to repair city roads and bridges, city building renovations, new city vehicles, streetlights, traffic signals, replacing lead service lines, as well as $1.5 million per alderman to use how they see fit.
So right here, they report the intended functions of the money that is being appropriated to this critical infrastructure as if the bill is primarily about infrastructure, the cover story for Brandon Johnson being able to get this money. But one of the things that I am happy about is that they talk about how basically the aldermen were bought off by this bill, in that these aldermen get $1.15 million in order to give to projects in their ward that they see fit. And obviously this is going to be utilized in order to secure their future election prospects. And if any of these aldermen voted for this bill and you see them doing a ribbon cutting ceremony or going out with the pothole crew and filling potholes in your neighborhood, understand that they're essentially bribing you with your own money that they stole from you in order to deceive you into voting for them. Because again, they are mortgaging the future for this, and you can make the case that maybe, just maybe, these repairs will last long enough and the economic impact will, of course, override the $2.1 billion cost of this $830 million right now. But the fact of the matter is that Chicago's credit rating has gone down for a reason, and the reason why is that they're constantly rolling over and financing debt with more and more debt. It's absolutely disastrous. Everybody who warned about how they're mortgaging the future is 100% right. And again, this money is going to be wasted. It's going to be blown.
Doing nothing, supporters of the mayor's plan say, would create chaos.
Potholes will grow bigger, vacant buildings will catch on fire, light poles will fall, and bridges could deteriorate beyond repair.
To be clear, no one in council argued to do nothing. Critics zeroing in, though, on the mechanics of payback. The $830 million bond will, in the end, cost the city $2 billion. The city choosing to pay interest-only payments through 2045, then begin paying off the principal. Critics wanted a bond half the size with a quicker payback to unburden future Chicagoans and prevent a further drop in the city's bond rating.
Now look, although they're not highlighting the key provision that I think is absolutely crucial in this particular bill, I do got to give the local news a ton of credit for the way that they're covering this, because you essentially have somebody saying, oh, you want us to do nothing, you're trying to get us to not have our roads fixed and whatnot, you don't have a solution, when in reality, this whole debate that was going on in the city of Chicago had an alternative plan where they would issue less bonds on a shorter time scale, make the absolutely crucial repairs, not give Brandon Johnson an $830 million slush fund to try to save his political career or pocket it when he gives the teachers union the contract that he wants to give them. And that alternative, they're just trying to pretend it didn't exist. They're trying to say that that was never put forward by the other aldermen that were against this. And to be clear, this was actually a very narrow vote. I believe it was 26 to 24 in favor of this, which just goes to show you how Brandon Johnson's political capital has been absolutely obliterated over time, and not a lot of people are willing to sign on with him.
It gives the mayor a slush fund to reward people who vote for these ill-advised budgets.
This motion passes.
In the end, it passed 26-23. Supporters say it's a safety net for an unstable financial pipeline from a Trump-run Washington that's targeting cities like Chicago, and that the loudest critics are from wards near downtown, where upkeep is rarely an issue.
Maybe some aldermen have the luxury of putting off infrastructure maintenance, but our community needs these investments now.
Now again, right here, you have this alderman from the 9th Ward calling out Brandon Johnson, calling out the other members of the Board of Supervisors for giving Brandon Johnson this slush fund in order to pay people off. But ultimately, we end up hearing that part of the justification for this is the fact that they fear that they're going to be targeted by the evil orange man because they put illegal immigrants first, protect illegal immigrant criminals, and this is now a justification in order to borrow this money. And make no mistake about it, they wanted to borrow this money the whole time, just like Brandon Johnson wanted that short-term, high-interest loan in order to pay off the teachers union to be borrowed by the Board of Education. They wanted this money all along. They were always going to push to do this. They always had fiscal problems, and they're just using the evil orange man as an excuse in order to get this narrowly through. And by the way, it was 26 to 23, so the estimate I had in my head was pretty damn close, but not accurate. I just want to correct that for everybody. and obviously it's a disaster, but it actually gets significantly worse.
Also at City Hall today, Marie, we learned of another high-level departure. This time it's the head of the Department of Parks in Chicago, the Park District head, Rosa Escareno. In recent weeks, the mayor has parted ways with multiple department heads, from aviation to the Civilian Office of Police Accountability to emergency management. Right. And so the churn continues over on the 5th floor across the street.
So obviously that is a very bad sign for the city of Chicago when you have all these different people jumping ship on Brandon Johnson, getting out of Dodge as fast as humanly possible. You understand that this person is losing political capital fast. His numbers are way down and it's basically unrecoverable. On top of that, a lot of times what we find out is that even people who were once appointed by Brandon Johnson are so disgusted with him they can't work with him, and then Brandon Johnson ends up firing them, trying to replace them. And when you criticize those firings, Brandon Johnson calls you an evil white racist. Remember, he did this to the board of directors of Chicago schools when they refused to remove Pedro Martinez when he didn't want to take this loan. So I'm sure there's additional corruption and nonsense going on in all these different other various departments.
Marks the 16-year anniversary of a financial deal so contentious it is often referred to as one of the biggest blunders in Chicago.
We're talking about the infamous 75-year parking meter lease.
But like I said earlier, I'm going to explain to you one of the biggest versions of this kind of short-term thinking that happened in the city of Chicago that might just be one of the worst deals a major municipality has ever stricken in order to close a short-term budget gap, because you guys will remember 2008 financial crisis. A bunch of these different institutions were running out of money. They lost money because people weren't buying real estate like they were, and they were dependent on those tax revenues from the real estate. And rather than do the responsible thing by making cuts in order to make sure your budgets aligned, that they were balanced, the city of Chicago decided that they were going to sell their parking meters for a one-time payment of $1.15 billion to a consortium of companies from the Arab Emirates, I believe. And they did this in order to close a short-term budget gap. Well, 16 years later, the Arab company still has the parking meters because the deal that they struck gave them control of it for 75 years. Originally, I thought it was 99 years, but it's actually 75 years. And it turns out they've not only already made back the $1.15 billion because they pull in over $140 million each and every year throughout the length of the contract, but they're actually up net by $500 million. So $500 million, almost all of what we're talking about that they would need, is the profit that this company made for that $1.15 billion.
He pushed the deal through city council in just 72 hours. The lease gave private investors control of parking meters for 75 years. The $1.50 billion payout fixed a budget hole during the Great Recession. But critics say the money wasn't invested wisely. And now Chicago gets nothing while private investors make huge profits. Joe Ferguson with the Civic Federation says the city learned a hard lesson, especially council members who, after the fact, complain they didn't have enough time to read the fine print.
Now, again, this was passed by Mayor Daley back in 2008. Brandon Johnson is not responsible for this, and it was actually passed, this major deal, just 72 hours after it was proposed in December, again, as people are approaching Christmas time, as a way to get around public scrutiny. And it's one of the worst deals in the history of any major city, not just Chicago, but it just goes to show you that this short-term quick injection in order to pay it off later ends up always backfiring on these municipalities, and they become disastrous deals, again, almost immediately. It didn't have to be this way. They could have solved this problem in another way by just maintaining their own infrastructure, by not going for short-term gain, but this is how democratic cities are run. Even though they can theoretically present a balanced budget, look at the cost of that balanced budget. If you're borrowing a bunch of money into your general fund in order to make things work, then obviously that's unsustainable, and that's what they're experiencing right now in the city of Chicago. And again, Brandon Johnson, as bad as he is, has yet to make a deal as terrible as the one that we saw from Mayor Daley, in an obvious instance, in my opinion, of corruption. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Chicago, pulling the trigger on a debt trap. Till next time.